You are listening to Third House Podcast, Astrology, Witchcraft, Creativity, and Life, with your host, Brittany Pastuhov, an astrologer and life coach specializing in confidence for women. Okay, hello and welcome. I'm
Thank
here
you.
with Michelle Artemis. Hi, Michelle. Thank you for being
Hi,
here today.
I'm happy to be.
Michelle is an astrologer and tarot reader based out of New England. She studied Hellenistic astrology and modern Western astrology, and she aims to synthesize both approaches in her practice. So I'm happy to have her today because I wanted to talk to Michelle about her research on Pluto transits, which I've heard a little bit about, and I found it so interesting. I think you all will too. So first, Michelle, can you tell us a little bit about how you got started as an astrologer and tarot reader?
Sure.
Yeah.
Um, so as a teenager, when my grandmother died, I discovered I hadn't been close to her, but I discovered going through her stuff with my dad that she had been an astrologer and a tarot reader, and I inherited all of her old books. And so that just like set me off, on this path. I was really interested in it, both to connect with her, but also just because it's really cool. And I hadn't realized like how in depth you could go with astrology. I had only been familiar with sun signs at that point. So yeah, so that is how I started. And then it wasn't until like the past couple of years that I've really like digged in deep and like learned the Hellenistic stuff and like that there's even more to do with astrology than I had realized growing up. So
Yeah, awesome. I love that because my grandmother was also really into astrology and got me into it. She was not a professional astrologer, but I got a folder of her charts like after her passing, and she had
wow,
like everyone's like the family birth dates and like all these charts. She had actually studied it, but I had no idea.
that's
So
amazing.
shout out to the grandmas.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So uh, going into like the more you're learning about like the Hellenistic astrology, the more you've added to your practice over the years, what made you want to research Pluto transits in particular?
Uh, that was more personal. That's because I have Pluto approaching my sun. So it's a little ways off, but I was just like, I wonder what this will bring for me. And I was like, well, I know people who have had Pluto transits and I've seen it come up in charts a couple of times where I was like, that is really powerful. I'd like to see like how this shows up for people on a wider scale. And so I just kind of did a call out to anybody that was interested in sharing with me that I could interview about their experiences. At first, I was just looking at Pluto and the Sun because that was what I'm approaching. But then I was stumbling on all of these other stories with the moon and the ascendant and Venus. And so then I went down that path as well. That
Yeah. And it just you and I both know this, but other people listening might not, that Pluto takes about 248 years, right, to cycle through the zodiac. So having Pluto make a conjunction to your natal sun is not necessarily something everyone will experience.
exactly. So when I was looking at the charts of people that I've worked with or charts of people that I knew personally and seeing like who to reach out for. Like usually people after a certain point will have experienced some kind of major Pluto transit, but not the same as everybody else. And like you might experience Pluto going over your natal moon, but you might never experience it opposite your natal moon and so on. So things like
Mhm.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. And what did you find about the meaning and impact of Pluto, like in astrology or on people in particular?
Well, I had always like understood Pluto as this transformative power, that there was like this need with Pluto to transform your life or yourself in some huge way. And that I had also had an understanding going into it that like the change that Pluto wants from you isn't necessarily something you can just be like, no, thank you. Like that you kind of like, you either go with it or you get drawn into it, but that like it will happen because it needs to happen. Um, so I was already aware of that going into it, but like, and I knew like the connection with Pluto and like fears or Pluto and like power and control and like things like that. But when I really started talking to people, I realized like just how intense Pluto is, and also how like I could say to someone like, okay, we're going to talk about your Pluto transits, and I'm just going to like throw out some dates, and you tell me what's going on, and I'd say a date, and they'd be like, oh, way to get right to it, like like that was like the hardest time of my life, or that was like the most life-changing period of my life, and so Pluto didn't disappoint with that. It was never a case where the person was like, I have no idea what was going on. Like they always knew right away. So it's definitely something that is memorable and it is something that changes you in some profound way.
Mm.
Yeah.
All right. What kind of profound changes were people going through?
I saw Pluto transits that lined up with somebody realizing that they needed to get sober, like the Pluto transit lining up perfectly with like it first becoming their drinking first becoming an issue, and then other people like as there's like the next conjunction, like other people starting to call them out on it, and then like as the series of conjunctions was ending, like them being like, okay, this is it, I'm done drinking, and then that really was it. Like that period of their life that lined up with the Pluto conjunction really was the period of their life where they are drinking too much and it led them to get sober, or like relationships lining up, like the beginning and the end of a relationship, usually some relationship that caused them to change in some meaningful way, or like caused them to like it set them off on a new direction in their life, and that like started with the first part of the Pluto conjunction or square or whatever, and then it ended as the closing square was happening. You know what I mean? So it was like that exact period of time would line up with something like that, or like a job, or I saw there was a lady who was trying to adopt a son, and she went through so much to get it to happen. Like there were so many, like she was almost able to adopt, and then it would fall through, and it was like lining up with this whole period with Pluto. And then as the Pluto transit was wrapping up, then she was finally able to adopt her son that she has now. Um, that was another one. Also, transitioning, like a trans friend was happy for me to share his story about how his Pluto conjunction over his sun and moon, because they're conjunct natally, was his whole transitioning process. Like first like coming out to people and first looking into it, and then like actually beginning the transitioning process, and then like wrapping up with him being like in the world publicly in his identity that he was happy with. And it was just like in his sixth house too. So it was just like it was like so perfect. The astrology was so perfect. But yeah, I mean there were so many.
For people listening with the sixth house, what about the sixth house made that perfect for
Oh,
the
having to do with the body and the health, and having his sun and moon there also being like he has this intense work ethic. So you get that part of the sixth house where he's just like constantly like working and like trying to get his career going, because that's also sixth house. But then also like so much of his life has been surrounding these topics of like the body, and not only health issues, but also this like transforming his like physical presentation. And yeah, so yeah.
Okay, so that was a transit to his sun and moon in the sixth.
Yeah, yeah, all at once. Yeah.
Okay. And
And
um, oh, I was gonna say, so common themes. So I'm noticing like it seems like the first aspect of Pluto to a natal planet or a point that's
mhm.
significant is there's some kind of something breaking. Like something is kind of you're becoming aware of a problem.
Yeah, a
That's
problem
really
or something
adaptation.
new, like a
Yeah.
new chapter in your life occurs.
Okay.
Like in situations like there was one where it was like the story of a pretty toxic relationship that this person was in, and they said in the end it was for the best, because as the Pluto transit ended and the relationship ended, they decided to move across the country, started their new life, met their future spouse. Like it was like, and they moved because of this relationship, right? So it was a really difficult experience being in the relationship, but it started with the first Pluto square in that case. I believe it was to their son, was as they were first starting the relationship. So it didn't seem like a problem at the time, but it was the beginning of the chapter, right? So
Right, right. Yeah. So when you're saying like with Pluto we don't really get to say no thank you, like the
yeah,
thing has to happen. It seems
yeah,
like there are gifts at the end though
yeah,
that there may be an ending, but there's also a new beginning, as
for
with the
sure.
person who is discovering that their drinking was really bad and then getting sober.
And it seems like a lot of times it doesn't get easier until the transit is over.
Mm,
Um, like even with like this, the person getting sober, or the relationship ending, like it's like you get that final transit, and that's around the time or even a little after, then that's when it starts to shift. So like the Pluto process itself is not usually pleasant. I only had like one person look back and be like, that was a great time in my life. But then he was older. And when I started like really questioning him on, it, I'm like, well, you were going through a lot of hard things also, but it's like your way of looking back on it and being like, overall, this was so good for me that now I see it in this positive light. Even though when you like objectively look at all the different things that happen, you have to be like, well, that must have been difficult at the time.
mm.
So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, definitely. So their Pluto transits also take a long time. Like Pluto will be in Aquarius for like 20 years. So
Yeah.
how long are we talking about more or less when Pluto is like
Yeah.
conjunct or aspecting a significant point?
Right. It sort of depends on where it is stationing, because it's usually about a year and a half, I would say, a year to a year and a half that you're really feeling it. I've noticed that like if Pluto is stationing close to in the exact aspect, but not quite there, some people will remember that as a point, like a starting point, but most people don't. Most people don't really recognize that chapter beginning until the first exact conjunction or square or what have you.
That-
But there were, yeah, there were a couple times where like the person had like a particularly good memory and could be like, yes, that is actually, this happened then and it led to whatever happened on the first conjunction, you know, so, um, but usually I would say about a year to a year and a half. It has to be really close. I mean, Pluto is, it moves so slowly. You feel it when it's really like within a degree for sure. If you're doing, if you're talking about like that first exact or the first time that a station's close, like it has to be within a degree, I think, to feel it as part of that chapter.
Okay, so yeah, so even though Pluto, for those listening, could be in a sign for many, many years, the
Yeah.
aspect that you feel as like this really intense transformative period of life would be about 18 months or so.
Yeah.
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 hmm
Yeah.
Okay.
I was looking at like the date of the first exact aspect, the date of the last, and then I would look to see if it's stationed really close before or after that, and then ask about those, but those didn't resonate as much. So,
Okay. Yeah. But the exact dates when you were like, what happened on January 16th? They're like, oh, that
yeah.
day. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and it depends on people's memories. So like sometimes I'd be like, okay, like these were the months that, you know, the aspect was exact. And they would be, you know, like, well, I definitely remember that month is when this happened. Then the other ones would be like, well, I think that was around when, you know, it's hard with people's memories. But
Right.
usually there were a couple times where I tried it the other way where I'd be like, you know, in this year, like what was going on? And then I would say, you know, like what months were you like, were like the major things happening? And then they could usually tell me like exactly when that aspect was exact. So that was kind of
It's
fun.
very unusual, I think, working with
Yeah,
astrology clients because people do, I mean, you don't really remember like the dates of when things happen. Memory is a funny, tricky thing.
I
So
know.
for something to be that memorable, it had to
Mm,
be extremely significant and emotionally poignant.
for sure. For
Yeah.
sure. And there were a couple times like I want to like sort of digress a little bit because we were talking about how like this is something that like transforms you and it's for the better. And there were a few examples where it was really hard to see that. And all of those examples were when the Pluto transits were to young children. So like I'm talking to friends and we're looking at ones when they're older. And then I realized like, oh, you also had this transit when you were really young. And then it
Mm,
was usually just like genuinely difficult and like one person lost their mother when they had a Pluto transit to the moon, and which, you know, to the moon, the association with the mother is interesting, but it's like obviously you don't want to frame that as like, you know, this like transformed you for the better or whatever, you know, like anything like that. But
mhm,
it was interesting because she said, and this was like her own words, like I wasn't even trying to get this out of her. We were talking about like because her mom died on the second exact aspect, and there was one before and one after, because you usually get three or five depending on the situation. So the one before had lined up with her finding out her mom, or no, she found out her mom was sick right before her mom died. So the one before was her last birthday before her mom died. And the one after was when she went back to school for the first time after her mom died. And then she described it as like they were the bookends to this like extremely transformative chapter of my life. And she said that. And I was like, you know, usually think of transformative as like a positive thing, or at least I do. But I mean,
mhm,
it did. It changed her entire life, you know? And she's like, you know, I wouldn't be who I am now if that hadn't happened. I wouldn't have done any of the things I did in my life if that hadn't happened. And so, you know, Pluto works like that too. And I do think there's like that bit with children, like they don't have that control over their lives and they don't have that like power to work with Pluto, you know, like
mhm.
adults maybe can try to. But
Yeah. And to some extent, they haven't made enough choices to be
yeah,
in a situation that they have to then get out of. You know,
yeah,
like a
yeah,
relationship or a job or
yeah,
something like that.
for
Uh,
sure.
and then some of these things really aren't choices, right? Like losing
Exactly.
one's mom or even
Yeah,
like being trans.
yeah, for sure.
When to transition. It's interesting to look at the transits of that, but then
Yeah.
like, yeah, or an addiction. So yeah, like you said, you can't really say no to it. It may,
No,
it,
exactly. It
yeah,
happens. Yep.
it happens anyway. Yeah, but
Yep.
that's an interesting distinction between children and adults and how they experience.
Yeah, I want to study it more because I only really came across I was trying to talk to people about like their adult experiences with Pluto primarily. Like I wasn't trying to talk about um childhood experiences. We just kind of stumbled upon it a few times and um I think every time that happened, it was like, wow, like this was really intense. Like another one was like a parent leaving, or another one was like almost drowning, like things that were like completely changed their lives and like changed like how they like um viewed themselves in their lives, but then also like completely out of their control, you know? So
Yeah.
it's interesting.
Has this research like changed or confirmed your perception of what Pluto's sort of essential meaning is in astrology?
I think I think it has caused me to focus more on Pluto as transformative than like fear-based or like people talk about Pluto a lot as like power struggles, and I didn't see it come up as much. Like you did a little bit with like some of the relationship stories people would talk about, but I didn't see it as much on like a personal level. And I'm sure like more like with mundane astrology that that would probably come up more, you know, as like a power thing, like people talking about Pluto and Aquarius and like power struggles. But like on a personal level, I saw it more as like some big change needing to happen in your life, and for the most part something that you're able to choose or to choose to work with, but like you can try to fight it, but it's like hard to do so. And I feel like it sort of lets you access like your own personal power more than like focusing on like a power struggle, you know,
Mm,
with someone else. And I think too that like Pluto is representing fear didn't come up as often as I expected either. Um, so yeah, I think it changed it a little bit, but mostly it changed like how I view Pluto transits and like um really realizing like how close to exact it needs to be to feel it. And it kind of, you know, eased up my expectation that like as Pluto is a few degrees away from my sun now that I would be feeling any different. And I'm like, I know that doesn't really line up with what I've seen from other people, you know? So
right. Yeah. Did people find the changes that happened when Pluto did hit that exact conjunction or aspect to be surprising? Or is there something leading up to it?
it seems like for most of the stories, I'm trying to run through some in my head right now. I think that for the most part, it was like kind of a Um, like it didn't feel like there was a lot of lead up. Like, hey, I'm
Mm,
in a new relationship. Hey, I just got this job. Or like, in one case where the person could remember the station leading up to the first exact aspect, they had moved cross country. So like, yes, they chose to do that, but it was also like kind of a random and like sudden decision that they made, and
mm.
that led them down this path. So it's like, yeah, they could see that it was coming because they chose it, but it was still there's something like, I don't know, it's interesting. It's almost like Pluto moves so slowly, but then like once it's there, it's like on, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking of it as like a word that people often use is rebirth in relationship to Pluto, and like birth is gestating for a while and behind the scenes, and then like it's happening. And
Yeah.
it's just gonna happen, you know.
Yep.
Usually the
Yeah,
woman baby intends it to happen, however that goes. So
exactly.
that's
Yeah.
interesting. So it was sort of like suddenly you're in a new place.
Yeah.
Suddenly something's
Yeah.
being born here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that another thing that I noticed a lot was the way the eclipses played in too. And
Mm,
that it kind of had that like similar feeling to like, eclipses as like great new beginnings or endings, and like that was like going along so well with the Pluto research. And then I would look to see where the eclipses were occurring, and it would go along so well with what was happening, and it was like almost like playing in together, so
oh,
that like with trying to think of a good example, there was one person whose Pluto transit to the moon was it was squaring the moon, I believe, and she had the eclipses were happening in her 12th and 6th house, and Pluto was in her first house as it was squaring her moon. So it wasn't like it was related to the body, but it was those eclipses I feel like that really brought it out because she needed to get surgery and be hospitalized. And like the Pluto transit was like leading up to deciding to get that surgery, but it was like, kids bullying her because she needed a back brace. And then it like led up to this process where she eventually needed this surgery. And then the surgery itself was like the end of the transit. And it was like, it's over. But like the eclipses there were really tied in, I think, with that theme of like being in hospitals and like seeing all these doctors and all of that too. So
okay. Kind of like the crisis or change
yeah,
momentum of an eclipse. So when you say they're tied in, just to break it down a little bit, like because you said the exact aspect of Pluto were kind of like the dates or months when things
Yeah.
were going down. Were the
Yes.
eclipses happening within a month of that?
Not as much. I mean, I would think that there were probably the problem is I'm looking back so far that a lot of people can't remember exact dates. So I
Of
didn't see
course,
a lot
yeah,
of examples where people were like, yes, that exact eclipse, like that's when that happened.
sure.
People remembered more by the
I
month.
remember your surgery date. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so it was more like I could really see the timeline lining up with the exact Pluto transits and the eclipses bouncing around between the houses. I would just kind of look and see like, okay, what houses were they happening in that period,
That's
not
one
like the
period.
date of the eclipse so
Okay.
much. Yeah.
So more like because we're thinking about eclipses as having their effects occur over 6 months and then
Yeah.
another set of eclipses every six
Yes.
months
Yes,
to move
yes.
things along. So like again, like that is an 18-month cycle, similar to what you said, is around the
Right.
time that Pluto may be an exact aspect to one's natal planets.
Yes.
Yeah. And I'm happy for you to share. I don't want to direct too much. So, like, do you want to share more stories or like I have more questions if you want?
Yeah, I'm trying to think if there was any like really cool ones that I wanted to mention because, well, I know one that was interesting to me because it was the only example where, as I'm interviewing the person, she was like, "Well, I mean, this was happening and it wasn't great, but it like wasn't terrible." And it was the only case where I was like, "This is not like what I'm usually hearing." And then
Mhm.
we look at her chart and it was a transit to her sun, conjunction to her sun, and Jupiter is also conjunct her sun, like very close. And it's almost like Jupiter was like protecting her through this transit. That's what it felt like. It was like,
Mhm.
oh no, it was a square because her sun and Jupiter in the eighth, and Pluto was in the fifth. And she did feel like during that time period, she didn't really like where she was living, and she felt like she kind of had to hide away or like find reasons to leave or whatever, with little eighth house, right? But then at the same time, she was obsessed with being creative, obsessed with photography. And like that was the Pluto transit, is just like going down this whole rabbit hole with like creative output and there is that like connection between Pluto and obsession, but it wasn't like that same intensity of like negativity that some people were telling with Pluto. And I thought
Mhm.
maybe that was because Jupiter was involved also. So that was an interesting one.
So if you're born with Jupiter conjunct the sun, you're
Yeah. Maybe
you're
those transits will be okay. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. I don't know. I think I could probably research this for the rest of my life and I'll still be learning new things and finding cool new stories. And I just love it.
absolutely.
Yeah. But there was trying to think what else. I mean, there was definitely a few relationship examples where their entire relationship coincided with the beginning and end of the Pluto transit.
Mm.
And usually it was like not the best relationship, but like caused them to grow up or caused them to do something new with their life. Um, there was one example where it was pretty spot on, where the person they had this really brief romance, like only a few months, and it lined up with the beginning of the Pluto transit. And then they got super depressed when it ended. And they just like went into this like period of like darkness, basically, is like how they described it. Like they were just like so depressed after this relationship ended. And then on the like, this person has a very good memory. So he remembered that as that the month that the last conjunction was happening, that was when he was finally like, you know what, enough is enough. I'm gonna like go online and start dating. And he like reached out to some women like right as that last conjunction was happening. And it was like, so it was like this distinct chapter, um, which was pretty interesting too.
And that's Pluto conjunct which natal point
I'm
or
trying to remember.
that's okay.
That was the ascendant. So
Oh, okay, so that's a big shift for one's
yeah,
identity. Yeah.
yeah, for sure. And tying in with the descendant,
Hmm.
obviously it's all tied together. So
Right. The first house or ascendant and ascendant being connected with the self, and then
yeah.
opposite that, the house of the
Yep.
other. Often partners or marriage partners or relationships, just for people listening.
And I
Yeah.
did see like obsession come up a couple times, like the one with the girl, like the pretty lighthearted one where she's just like obsessed with photography, right? But then there was also one where this person was trying to like they ended up marrying the person that they met at the first uh, the first exact aspect. I can't remember what the aspect was, but it was the first exact aspect to their sun. And so they met them with the first exact aspect. And then there was like months where they were just trying to convince this person to date them, just like obsessively trying to convince this person to date them. And then finally, the person agreed as they hit the second exact aspect. And then by the third one, they were moving in together. But like that, like Pluto, like intensity is like so obvious there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting. It's like
Yeah,
Pluto
I thought so.
pursuit. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
But it's interesting that you didn't see a lot of like stories of like power struggles or like spooky stuff because I feel like that does get invoked a lot when we talk about
Yeah.
Pluto and astrology. And yeah, in people's real lives, listening to these stories, it's life-changing, but
Yeah.
not necessarily like scary.
Yeah, I didn't see much of that. I think the only scary one that I could really think of was the kid that almost drowned.
Yeah,
Um, but, you know, that was like he was very young.
right.
And doesn't remember dates well enough for me to be able to time it well. But
Yeah.
that was like the one thing he was like, well, this happened then, you know. But besides that, like I didn't see it come up as much as I expected either.
Right. And then of course losing one's parents.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
But
Yeah.
yeah, but not always like this
Mhm.
terrifying thing.
Yeah.
Um, did you
Because
notice?
it's so drawn out, you
Yeah,
know?
that
I think
too.
that's why. And it's like you look back and you're like, yeah, this was obviously like a distinct chapter in my life and like it was really hard looking back on it. But while you're in it, like other things are going on too. You know,
Yeah.
it's not like for a whole year, like all you're thinking about and doing is whatever this one topic is, you know? So, I mean, obviously, if it's about like, you know, you're a kid and you're losing your mom, like that is going to be all encompassing. But like, even like when you're in like a bad relationship, there's other things going on too. So I think
Mhm.
that kind of, I think that's maybe why it's not so terrifying in general, just because it's kind of drawn out. Um, you know?
Yeah, and it seems more psychological almost. Like this is
Yeah.
when I made a decision, or like this is
Mhm.
when I became obsessed with this,
Yeah.
topic.
Yeah,
And then of course, like one's natal planets or whatever else is going on can temper it. Like with the client who had, Sun Jupiter conjunction in the natal chart, changes the entire temperament of the Pluto aspect.
for sure.
Yeah. Did you notice other kind of differences in like temperament or like notes on if it was Pluto aspecting the sun or the moon or Venus, or if it was like a conjunction versus a different aspect?
Yeah, I noticed it seemed like there was a little bit less control, and this might just be like the people I happened to interview, but from like the people I interviewed, it seemed like with the conjunctions that it was a little bit less in their control, and that the squares was more like being like initiated to do something to make some change, that came up a little bit more.
That's
Um,
interesting.
with the I think I only really talked to one person about a Venus square, and that one was very much out of her control. That was a miscarriage story, that we weren't even trying to get at. It's just her Venus was near her sun-ish. So it was like, you know, we were trying to narrow down the dates, and I was like, oh, like as you were having this miscarriage, like Pluto was exactly square your Venus, in the fifth, you know. So that one was another example, I guess, of an adult like situation where it's not within your control, but then, you know, she immediately got pregnant again and then was able to have a baby. And now she has that baby, you know, so there's like this had to happen for us to be where we are now, sort of mentality was kind of how she described it. But um yeah, I'm not sure that I saw. I mean, I think that most people really remembered their Pluto sun transits, their Pluto moon transits. When I
Mhm.
tried to like look at some of the other ones, it didn't come up as much, but I would like to do more research, you know, and see what else I can find. So,
Yeah, I remember talking to you about this before we scheduled this call, and I had Pluto square my sun in Libra when Pluto was in Capricorn, and that did feel like initiation. Kind of, it was when I quit to go freelance and started being a freelance writer and started giving astrology readings. It felt like a choice, but also, like I told you at the time, it felt very do or die. Like it felt very
mhm.
intense and intensely important to be authentic at that moment. And there were
Yeah,
other things going on, but yeah.
yeah, for
Uh,
sure.
it wasn't necessarily something that was out of my control, but it was
Yeah.
kind of it would have seemed sudden to other people in my life.
Right. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, I've only had one Pluto transit so far, and I wasn't tracking it at the time, but I had a Pluto conjunction to my moon, and during that year. I'm sure it seemed very sudden to everyone else because I was very young, but I got married, I moved to another state, and I had a baby. So like all during that Pluto conjunction.
Springtime,
Yeah.
yeah.
But at the
That's
time, it
perfect.
was like, this is clearly what I need to do. Like, it was like, I
Right.
mean, well, my Pluto is also conjunct Uranus natally. So it was very much like, I have to do this. Like, I have to break free and, like go off and do my own thing. But yeah, it was like the most transformative period of my life so far. So, it kind of makes me curious. We'll see what the sun brings. But
Wow. What do you think about the Pluto Sun transit, what it might bring, or like transformations that
I'm
occur?
hoping
Like,
it's about astrology because my son's in the ninth house. So that's what I'm hoping. But I don't know. I think it might end up surprising me and that whatever I try to predict now I'll just laugh at it afterwards. But I don't know. I hope it's about astrology because I've really been focusing on that and like really just like digging in and trying to devote more of my time and energy to it. So
we're already studying in homage to Pluto, studying.
yes, 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 exactly. I'm trying to work with you, Pluto.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And all the other like Aquarius sun and moon because Pluto is in Aquarius now. So like I've talked about it in mundane terms, kind of about like political revolution and like, big changes happening on a societal level, but on an individual level, the conjunctions to the sun and the moon. So if you are Aquarius, sun or moon listening, are some of the more like intense or like life-changing kind of events over the year and a half that is more exact.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would look if you expect this to be coming up for you, like I would look for the dates of the exact conjunctions. And
Mhm.
as you're like near that first one, I would just really be paying attention to like what do I feel like I need to do right now? Like what do I feel drawn to? Like what major change is happening in my life right now? But it might end up being something that you see more in retrospect. Sometimes it's hard to see like as it's happening, like this is the start of something life defining, you know. By the end of it, you'll probably have a pretty good idea what it was about. But I don't think that for all the stories that I saw that everybody would have realized right from the beginning if they were paying attention, like this is it.
Hmm. Hmm.
So,
Yeah, everything's clearer in hindsight,
for
especially
sure.
a long term, like 2 years of your life. That's
Yeah.
the
Yeah, yeah.
opinion.
Yep.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Um, awesome. I think it's so interesting. Do you think, Michelle, that Pluto transits are more intense than other types of astrological transits? Like even more than we talk about the Saturn return and Saturn transits a lot. Like, how do you think they differ from other transits?
I think that with Pluto, it's more of an even playing field between day and night charts. I mean, I don't think, you know what I mean? Like Saturn can be a little harder for you if you have a day chart. Than a night chart. So there's that difference. I also think that um, I think you're less likely to see the like situations out of your control with Saturn than with Pluto. I would think that because I think that with Saturn a lot of times it's like, you can work with it and like put in the work and like really get somewhere. And I think that with Pluto, there's almost like this like call to do something or like a call to make some kind of a change. And I think you're going to get into a more difficult situation with your transit if you're like trying really hard to fight it.
Mhm.
And with Saturn, I think you can more easily choose to not put the work in and you just won't grow. You know what I mean? And that's not always true. Like obviously you're going to have like situations where you have a Saturn transit and it's something hard and maybe you didn't have a choice and but like in general, generally speaking, I think that it's harder to ignore Pluto, but that because it's sort of drawn out similar to a Saturn transit, I think that's probably the closest similarity in transits just because they're drawn out over a period of time and like Saturn traversing like a chart, house in your chart would be sort of a similar feeling to like a Pluto transit in terms of like it's drawn out. So there's going to be more intense periods.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that. Like putting the work in versus, yeah, you could just not grow. But with
Yeah,
Pluto,
yeah,
it's like something's going to change.
yeah, yeah. I heard one teacher say like you have to choose a change before it chooses you, you know. I'm like, yeah, I like that.
Yeah, I find that to be true too with
Yeah,
clients and with myself. Like if
yeah,
you're directing it, it tends to go a little more, the ride is a little less bumpy.
yeah.
Yeah. How about people who are born with this, like with Pluto on the sun or Pluto on the ascendant? Like, how is life for them maybe like different in quality than other people's? Not in quality, like better or worse, but you know what I mean? Like, how does
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I don't think
yeah.
that I've really had any good examples of that come up in my research. And now I'm wondering like if you would feel more like at home with Pluto, if you would have probably made your peace with Pluto a little bit earlier and sort of been forced to in some way.
Mm,
That would be my guess, is that perhaps the Pluto transit would feel more natural to you because you have already been like in intimately,
mhm.
facing Pluto your whole life.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, that would be my expectation there.
Yeah, that is almost yeah. Like I mean, if you were born with Pluto on the sun, you're not going to have like Pluto return to your sun in your lifetime. But like any other
Yeah.
Pluto transits
Yeah.
would feel more natural, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. When you get to that square. And maybe it's like that's the point when it like activates whatever that natal placement is, and like maybe it becomes even more like crucial to your identity because it's like activating this natal placement in such a big way too.
Yeah, maybe. And in the way that people live with yeah, like just different transits that they were born with, they kind of embody those. And it's like the people born with Mercury retrograde will often tell me, like during a retrograde, they're like, well, I feel like this is like my best time to
Yeah.
thrive,
Yeah.
this is my life always is. Um,
Right.
so it's interesting how people kind of integrate those energies into their
Yeah.
lives and personalities unconsciously.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, Okay, so preparing for an upcoming Pluto transit, how should audience members kind of prepare and integrate the lessons? I know you said like it can be hard, during and maybe easier to integrate after.
Yeah, I mean, I would look at the area of your chart where this is going to be happening. And if it's a square or an opposition, I would be looking at both the houses where Pluto is and the natal placement. And I would be looking at where in general the eclipses are happening in that time frame. And I'd be thinking about like what can I do to get those areas of my life in like the best shape possible, Like try to like be thinking about like how can I like proactively be trying to improve this part of my life? Because, if it's having to do with your career and your career is like you're working this job that is like not right for you and you hate it, like why not like start like trying to deal with this now before all of a sudden Pluto comes and it's like you must change.
Mhm.
So that's what I would do. I would just be looking at like the general areas and just trying to think about how I could improve them, how I could try to make choices that feel more authentic to myself, how I could try to like take back my power and like personal power in those areas. Um,
Mhm.
and then just like when it starts going down, if it does feel like hard right off the bat, like no, like it's a distinct period of time and it will end. And so many of the people said afterwards, like it was for the best. Like even the hard stuff that it somehow set their life off on the course that they wouldn't change. I mean, obviously there's those exceptions, but for the most part, that's what people said. Like this,
Mhm.
this was good for me in the end. So trying to keep that in mind too as you're going through it.
Yeah, so it's not something to be scared of. In fact, it can actually help you level up in your personal power in
Yeah.
area of
I'm
life.
trying to look forward to it. I'm trying to view
Yeah.
it as like it might be hard, but it's going to be good for me. That's what I'm telling myself. So, yeah. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. Um, yeah, I think it can feel hard during because you're making a big change and making a big
Yeah,
change is always challenging
for
because
sure.
it'd be easier to stay the same.
Yeah.
Um, so, but at the same time, it can be exciting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah. Um, okay. And do you have any advice for people integrating the lessons of a Pluto transit, like after making a big change in their life?
I mean, definitely just like reflecting on it, writing on it, like trying to like take notes as you're going through it too. Like, if you're able to, and like really paying attention to what was going on so that you can sort of disentangle like what was this Pluto transit about for me and like how did it change me? And then being able to look back and be like, I was able to like access this like intense power of Pluto and be able to get through that period or grow from that period or use it to my advantage and like being able to draw on that as like a source of strength personally too. um, I don't think that it's any small feat to be able to go through a Pluto transit and come out strong on the other side. I think that is something to be proud of. So you don't have a choice, but you can still be proud of yourself for it making it through. But
Yeah, that was reminding me of like the mythical implications, all the stories of gods and people going to the underworld and coming back out a
yeah.
changed person, right? Like there's a
Yeah,
trial to go through to bear, and there maybe is something to let go of, but then coming back out, even like the story of Venus retrograde, right? Like
yeah,
coming back out on the other side, like changed for the better in some way.
definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, Okay. Any particular thoughts or predictions for Pluto transiting Aquarius since we have that through like, what is it, 2044?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've just been tracking all of the local strikes and things going on. I've been
Right.
very
Right.
interested in that.
Totally.
Our struggles for sure, definitely come up
For
in that.
sure. No, but I love it because it's power to the people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm pretty excited about it. I mean, I think that Aquarian energy is so natural and like at home for me that like I'm excited to see Aquarian change in the world. But yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be about, well, obviously all of the like technological innovations and things like that, and like people like making all this um, like forward thinking change. But then I also think that that sort of like willing to question the status quo, that like willingness to be like yes, we do it this way, but why do we do it this way? And like why do we have to? And like just because everybody says we have to do it this way doesn't mean we have to, you know? So like I love that about Aquarius, and I'm hoping that we can see that in the world a bit.
Yeah. So really big transformations about just the way
Yeah.
we think about society or workers' rights and like
Yeah, for
having
sure.
new ideas about how to structure things.
Yeah, and just like the inequality in the world and like it's like almost reached a tipping point. So it feels like Pluto and Aquarius can like help us address that, hopefully.
Yeah, I think the inequality in the US right now is worse than it was during the French Revolution in France. So,
Yeah, like
yeah,
that.
I'm
That's
feeling that.
exactly it.
I'm seeing a lot of
Oh, and
that.
that was Pluto
Um,
and Aquarius too, right? Like,
yeah, that
yeah,
was this
yeah.
is
So
the
there you go.
return. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, okay. So lots of exciting potential developments also for our Aquarius friends and for
yeah,
you. Yeah.
yeah.
What's coming up for you? Where can people find you? Tell them all about it.
All right, so I'm on my website's michelleartemis.net, and I have also a YouTube channel, Michelle Artemis, and Instagram and threads and all of that at Michelle Artemis Astrology. Right now, I'm mostly just doing readings. I'm really focusing on readings and loving it. And I've been doing a lot of synastry readings, and I'm like really diving into locational astrology. I just completed a course in that recently and I loved it. So like I'm super pumped about that. And
Said locational?
yeah, locational astrology, like yeah, astrocartography and local space and all that. So very excited about that. And then I started that YouTube channel this year and I'm hoping to get going with it more. I've put a handful of videos up there and I enjoy it, but it's very time consuming. So I'm hoping this summer when I have more time, I can do a little more with it and keep it going. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's where I am.
This will be up on YouTube. So, and all of Michelle's links will be in the show notes. You can go to her website, you can book a reading, you can find out locational astrology and astrocartography is basically looking at how your chart maps to different places and how like different places might affect you or change for you. So if you're looking at a move or just curious about locational astrology, Michelle's got that. Curious about astrology in general, Pluto transit coming up, other transits.
Mhm.
Got it. And this will be up on your YouTube channel too.
Perfect.
Yeah, so fun. Can people contact you with like Pluto stories? Are you still doing this
Oh
research?
yeah, I
Oh,
would love to hear it. Yeah,
okay.
definitely. And my email, if anyone wants to email me, is michelleartemis1@gmail.com.
Okay. And I can put that in the show notes too. So
Yeah.
if you have a Pluto transit story you want Michelle to hear for her research, then please email her too.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
Sounds
thank
good.
you so much, Michelle. It was a pleasure having you on.
Thank you for having me.